There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in a glass house perched on the edge of a cliff. It is not an empty silence, but a heavy and waiting one. Here in Big Sur, the fog rolls in off the Pacific Ocean like a thick white blanket, and it muffles the world until it feels as though I am the only person left on Earth. My name is Miriam Calloway, and for 40 years I made my living finding things that powerful men wanted to keep hidden. I was a forensic accountant, which sounds dry on paper, but in practice, it was more like being a hunter. I tracked money through shell companies and offshore accounts and hidden ledgers. I looked at numbers and I saw lies. Now I am 71 years old and I am retired, and the only numbers I track are the tides and the temperature of my tea. The house was a gift from my late husband, Richard. He loved the drama of it, the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the churning gray water and the sharp rocks below. He used to say it was a fortress of solitude, but tonight, as the wind began to howl and rattle the panes, it felt more like a cage. I was sitting at the mahogany desk in the library organizing Richard's old archives. Even 3 years after his death, he still managed to surprise me with his chaos. He was a brilliant man, but he was messy. He left digital footprints everywhere, and tonight I was trying to consolidate his old hard drives before I wiped them clean. One drive in particular sat on the desk next to my hand. It was a small silver block that looked innocent enough, but I knew better. It contained the encryption keys to an offshore contingency fund he had set up in the Cayman Islands. It was not illegal, strictly speaking, but it was gray. Very gray. I intended to liquidate it quietly and donate the entire sum to a dog shelter in the morning. But plans have a way of changing when the doorbell rings at 10 o'clock at night in the middle of a storm. I froze. My hand hovered over the silver drive. Nobody came up here unannounced. The driveway is a winding, treacherous mile of dirt and gravel that washes out every time it rains, and it was raining hard tonight. I slipped the drive into the pocket of my cashmere cardigan, and I stood up. My knees popped slightly, and I took a breath to steady my heart rate. I walked through the living room, and I could see the twin beams of headlights cutting through the fog outside. A car was idling in my driveway. I turned on the porch light and opened the heavy oak door just a crack. The wind tried to rip it from my grasp, and it carried the smell of ozone and wet pine needles. Standing on my welcome mat, shivering in a thin leather jacket, was a young man I had not seen in 5 years. It was Felix, Richard's nephew. He looked terrible. He was 28 years old, but under the harsh yellow porch light, he looked like a frightened child. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with rain, and his eyes were wide and bloodshot. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, as if the ground beneath him was hot. "Miriam!" he shouted over the wind. "Thank God you are home." I opened the door wider and ushered him inside, not because I was happy to see him, but because I wanted to close the door against the storm. He stumbled in and dripped water onto my slate floors. I locked the door behind him and turned to face him. I let my face soften into the expression people expect from a 71-year-old widow. It is a useful mask. It suggests frailty and confusion and warmth. It makes people underestimate you. "Felix," I said, and I made sure my voice trembled just a little. "What on earth are you doing here? You are soaked to the bone." He ran a hand through his wet hair and gave me a smile that looked painful. He told me that he was just passing through on his way to San Francisco, and he got caught in the weather. He said he thought he would stop by and check on his favorite aunt since he was in the neighborhood. I looked at him, and I did what I have always done. I audited him. His shoes were expensive Italian leather loafers, but they were scuffed deeply at the toes, and the leather was stained with salt. That told me he had been walking near the ocean recently and not just driving. His jacket was a designer brand, but the cuffs were frayed. And then there were his hands. He was trying to keep them in his pockets, but I saw the tremor. It was a fine, rapid shaking that I had seen 1,000 times before in clients who were hiding tax fraud or embezzlement. It was the vibration of adrenaline and fear. I smiled at him and told him to take off his coat. I told him I would put the kettle on. I turned my back to him and walked toward the kitchen, and as I walked, I listened. I listened to his breathing, which was too fast and too shallow. I listened to the sound of his footsteps, which were heavy and uneven. He followed me into the kitchen and sat on one of the high stools at the granite island. The kitchen is sleek and modern, with everything hidden behind seamless white cabinets. I filled the electric kettle and switched it on. The low hum of the boiling water filled the silence between us. I asked him how his business was going. I remembered vaguely that he had started some sort of cryptocurrency venture a few years ago. Richard had called it a pyramid scheme wrapped in a riddle, but Felix had been very proud of it. He laughed, and it was a brittle sound. He told me business was great. He said he was just taking a little break to clear his head. He said the market was volatile and he needed some sea air. Lies. I could smell the lie on him just as clearly as I could smell the damp wool of his sweater. If business was great, he would not be driving up a dangerous mountain road in a storm to visit an aunt he hadn't spoken to since the funeral. If business was great, he would not be looking at my kitchen counters with hungry, desperate eyes. He was looking for something. I placed a mug of chamomile tea in front of him. The steam curled up between us. I watched him wrap his cold hands around the mug. I noticed he wasn't wearing his watch anymore. It was a vintage Rolex that Richard had given him for his 21st birthday. Felix used to wear it everywhere. The absence of the watch told me more than his words did. He had sold it, or pawned it. Which meant he was not just broke. He was in debt, and based on the terror in his eyes, it was the kind of debt you couldn't discharge in bankruptcy court. I took a sip of my own tea and decided to push him just a little. I asked him if he had heard from his mother lately. He flinched. The tea sloshed over the rim of his mug and burned his hand, but he didn't even swear. He just wiped it away quickly on his jeans. He told me he hadn't spoken to her much. He said he had been so busy with the investors. Investors. That was the word that confirmed it. In my line of work, whenever a desperate man starts talking about investors, it usually means he has lost someone else's money. The wind slammed against the kitchen window with a sudden violence that made the glass vibrate. Felix jumped so hard he nearly fell off the stool. He spun around and stared out into the blackness of the night. His reaction was visceral. He wasn't just jumpy. He was terrified of what might be out there in the dark. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the silver drive. I knew exactly why he was here. He remembered Richard talking about the contingency fund. He remembered the stories of the hidden assets. Felix wasn't here for a visit. He was here for a bailout, and he didn't care that the money wasn't his. I put down my mug and gave him a sympathetic smile. I told him he looked exhausted. I told him he could stay in the guest room tonight. I said we could catch up properly in the morning when the storm had passed. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the calculation in his eyes. He was assessing me just as I had assessed him. He saw an old woman in a big, lonely house. He saw a widow who probably didn't understand technology or finance. He saw an easy target. He thanked me and said that sounded perfect. He said he just needed to make a quick phone call, and then he would turn in. I told him to take his time. I told him I was going to head to the library to finish up some reading. I walked out of the kitchen and I felt his eyes on my back until I turned the corner. As soon as I was out of sight, my smile vanished. I moved silently down the hallway toward the library. I needed to act fast. Felix was desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. He thought he was the predator in this house, and I was the prey. He thought he had walked into a house of glass where everything was transparent and fragile. He was wrong. He had walked into a vault. And I was the one holding the combination. I entered the library and closed the door softly. The room was lined with books from floor to ceiling and smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I went straight to the desk. I took the silver drive out of my pocket. This was the key. This was what he wanted. If I refused to give it to him, he might get violent. If I gave it to him, I would be complicit in whatever mess he had created. I needed a third option. I looked at the floor safe in the corner of the room under the rug. It was an old model. Richard had bought it 20 years ago. It had a mechanical dial, and it was sturdy, but compared to modern security, it was a toy. Anyone with a stethoscope and a YouTube tutorial could crack it in an hour. An idea began to form in my mind. It was cold and sharp and precise. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a spare USB drive. It was identical to the silver one in my pocket, except this one was empty. Or rather, it appeared empty. I had used it years ago to store some corrupt tax files I was analyzing for a case. It was full of digital junk. Useless data that looked important until you tried to open it. I sat down at the computer and plugged in the decoy drive. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I needed to make it look convincing. I created a folder named Ledger, and inside, I placed a password-protected zip file. I made sure the encryption level looked high, but was actually quite brittle. I was setting the board. I was placing the cheese in the trap. Outside, the thunder rolled like a heavy barrel across the sky. I could hear Felix pacing in the living room. His footsteps were agitated. He wasn't making a phone call. He was searching. He was opening drawers. I could hear the soft slide of wood on wood. Let him search. Let him think he is clever. I took the real silver drive, the one with the millions of dollars in access codes, and I walked over to the bookshelf. I pulled out a copy of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. It was a hollowed-out book safe that I used to keep spare cash in. I tucked the real drive inside and slid the book back onto the shelf. It disappeared into the row of spines. Then I went to the floor safe. I pulled back the Persian rug. I spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open. I placed the decoy drive inside. I placed it right in the center on the velvet lining so it would be the first thing anyone saw. I closed the safe and spun the dial to lock it. I pulled the rug back over it. My heart was beating a little faster now. Not from fear, but from focus. I felt the old thrill coming back. The thrill of the chase. The thrill of outsmarting a liar. I stood up and smoothed down my cardigan. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look like a forensic accountant anymore. I looked like Miriam. I looked like a tired old woman ready for bed. I opened the library door and walked back out into the hallway. The house was dark now, except for the lightning flashing through the glass walls. I saw Felix standing by the fireplace. He had a poker in his hand. He was poking at the logs, but his grip was too tight. When he saw me, he jumped and quickly put the poker down. I smiled at him. I told him I had left some fresh towels in the guest room. I told him to sleep well. He watched me climb the stairs to my bedroom. He waited until I was all the way up and the door clicked shut. I didn't turn on my light. Instead, I sat in the chair by the door and I waited. I waited for the sound of the rug being moved. I waited for the game to begin. The storm did not break in the night. Instead, It settled into a relentless gray downpour that wrapped the house in mist and made the ocean below sound like a distant cannonade. I had not slept. I had spent the night in the wingback chair by my bedroom door, listening to the creak of the floorboards downstairs. Felix had been restless. I heard him pacing the length of the living room, and I heard the soft click of the refrigerator door opening and closing. He was hunting, but he was hunting blindly. He did not know the house, and he did not know me. When the sun finally rose, it was just a pale bruise behind the clouds. I showered and dressed in my usual uniform of dark slacks and a silk blouse. I brushed my hair and applied a touch of lipstick. Armor. It is all armor. When I walked down the floating staircase, the house felt cold. The glass walls, which usually let in so much warmth, were just sheets of condensation today. I found Felix in the kitchen. He was sitting at the island exactly where I had left him 10 hours ago. His laptop was open in front of him, and there were 3 empty espresso pods scattered on the counter. He looked haggard. The circles under his eyes were dark purple bruises, and his jaw was covered in a day of stubble. He closed the laptop quickly when he heard my footsteps. It was a guilty movement. A reflex. "Good morning, Felix," I said brightly. "I hope you managed to get some sleep with all that wind." He rubbed his face with both hands and gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said he slept fine. He said the sound of the ocean was actually quite soothing. Lies again. I walked past him to the coffee machine. I could smell the stale scent of fear on him mixed with the sharp aroma of espresso. I busied myself with the machine and turned my back to him. This is an interrogation technique I learned 30 years ago. If you want someone to talk, you give them your back. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel unobserved. I asked him if he wanted breakfast. I offered eggs or toast. He said he wasn't hungry. He tapped his fingers on the closed lid of his laptop. The sound was rhythmic and annoying. Tap, tap, tap. "So, Miriam," he started, and his voice was too casual. It was the forced casualness of a man trying to walk across a tightrope. "I was wondering about Uncle Richard's office. I know he had a lot of equipment, servers and things. Did you ever clear any of that out?" I paused with the coffee pot in my hand. Here it was, the probe. He wasn't wasting any time. I turned around slowly and put on my mask of confusion. I furrowed my brow just slightly. "Oh, you know me, Felix," I said with a little self-deprecating laugh. "I am hopeless with technology. Richard had so many gadgets. I wouldn't know a server from a toaster. I haven't touched a thing in there. It is all just gathering dust in the library." I watched his throat work as he swallowed. I saw the relief wash over him. He thought he had hit the jackpot. He thought he was dealing with a senile old woman who had left the vault door wide open. He leaned forward and his tone became helpful, almost patronizing. "Well, you know, Miriam, that stuff can be a fire hazard. Old electronics overheat. Maybe I could take a look for you. Sort through it. Make sure it is safe. I have some time today before I head back to the city." I took a sip of my coffee to hide the smirk that wanted to curl on my lips. It was almost too easy. He was using the oldest trick in the book, the benevolent expert. I remembered a case I worked on in '98 involving a CEO who tried to hide assets in a charitable foundation. He used the exact same tone. He told the auditors he was just trying to help the orphans while he was funneling millions into a shell company in Panama. I looked at Felix, and I nodded gratefully. "That would be wonderful, Felix," I said. "I have been meaning to deal with it, but it is just so overwhelming." Richard kept everything in the floor safe and on those little drives. I don't even know the passwords. I dropped the bait. I mentioned the safe. I mentioned the drives. And I mentioned the lack of passwords. Felix's eyes widened. He stood up from the stool a little too quickly, and his knee bumped against the granite. "The floor safe?" he asked. "The one in the library?" "Yes," I said, "under the rug. But please don't ask me for the combination. I have it written down somewhere, but my memory isn't what it used to be." He was practically vibrating now. He was already mentally counting the money. He mumbled something about needing to stretch his legs and check the Wi-Fi signal. I told him to go ahead. I told him I was going to read my book in the sunroom and that he shouldn't worry about me. He left the kitchen and headed straight for the hallway that led to the library. He didn't run, but he walked with a purpose that he hadn't had 5 minutes ago. I waited until he was gone, and then I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the app that controlled the house's smart system. I tapped on the camera feed for the library. The image popped up on my screen in crisp, high definition. It was a black and white feed, but I could see everything clearly. I saw Felix enter the room. He didn't look at the books. He didn't look at the view. He went straight to the rug in the corner. He kicked the rug aside with his foot. He dropped to his knees in front of the safe. He pressed his ear against the cold steel door and began to spin the dial. I sat on the stool in my kitchen and watched him. It was a strange feeling. Part of me felt a deep sadness. I remembered him as a little boy. I remembered him playing catch with Richard on the lawn. I remembered his laugh. Where had that boy gone? When did the greed eat him alive? But the other part of me, the part that had spent 40 years hunting wolves, was cold and calculating. I watched his hands moving on the dial. He wasn't using a stethoscope. He was using a digital algorithm cracker, a small device he had pulled from his pocket and attached to the dial. It was sophisticated tech. Not the kind of thing a failed crypto bro usually has. That changed things. If he had professional cracking tools, it meant he wasn't just in debt to a bank or a credit card company. He was in debt to organized crime. You don't get that kind of hardware at the local electronics store. You get it from loan sharks who want their money back with interest or blood. This wasn't just a theft anymore. It was a desperate bid for survival. On the screen, I saw the safe door click open. Felix let out a breath that fogged the air in front of him. He reached in. He ignored the stacks of old legal papers. His hand went straight for the decoy drive sitting on the velvet lining. He held it up to the light like it was a holy relic. He kissed it, actually kissed the plastic casing. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see his body language. He was triumphant. He was pacing around the library, waving his free hand. He was telling someone he had it. He was telling them the debt was paid. I closed the app and set my phone down on the counter. My hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from anger. He had brought this darkness into my home. He had brought his mistakes and his criminals to my doorstep and expected me to foot the bill. I finished my coffee. It was cold now and tasted bitter. I stood up and walked to the knife block on the counter. I pulled out a small paring knife. I didn't intend to use it on Felix. I intended to use it on the fruit bowl. I began to slice an apple into thin, precise wedges. Slice, slice, slice. I needed a plan for the next phase. He had the decoy. Now he needed to open it. He would try to do it here. He wouldn't risk leaving with an encrypted drive until he verified the contents. He would go back to his laptop. He would plug it in. And that was when the trap would spring. But I needed to be in the room when it happened. I needed to see his face when he realized the drive was empty of money but full of consequences. I arranged the apple slices on a plate. I added some crackers and a piece of sharp cheddar cheese. A nice mid-morning snack. I picked up the plate and walked toward the library. I moved quietly. The carpet swallowed the sound of my footsteps. I reached the library door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with my foot. Felix was sitting at Richard's desk. He had his own laptop open, and the decoy drive was plugged into the side. The screen was reflecting blue light onto his face. He was typing furiously. He didn't hear me come in. "Knock, knock," I said softly. He jumped so hard he nearly knocked the laptop off the desk. He spun around in the chair. His face was pale and he was sweating. He tried to slam the laptop shut, but the drive was in the way. "Miriam," he stammered, I was just checking the inventory." "Like I said." I walked into the room and placed the snack plate on the edge of the desk. I looked at the screen. I saw the progress bar. He was running a brute force decryption program. It was at 90%. "You are working so hard, Felix," I said, and my voice was smooth as glass. "You really should eat something. You need to keep your strength up." He looked at the apples. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He realized I wasn't asking what he was doing. He realized I wasn't surprised. The computer beeped. "Access granted" popped up on the screen in bright green letters. Felix turned back to the screen. He couldn't help himself. The hunger was too strong. He clicked on the folder named Ledger. I took a step back. I moved closer to the door. "Go ahead, Felix," I whispered. "Open it. See what your uncle left for you." There is a moment in every interrogation when the suspect realizes the door has been locked from the outside. It isn't a sound. It is a shift in the air pressure, a drop in temperature. That moment happened the second Felix clicked on the folder named Ledger. The library was silent except for the hum of his laptop fan, which was spinning loudly as it tried to process the data. Felix leaned in his nose inches from the screen. I stood by the door, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, watching the back of his neck. I saw the tension in his shoulders relax for a split second as the file opened, and then immediately snapped tight again, like a bowstring. He was staring at rows of numbers. To the untrained eye, they looked like bank routing codes and account balances. But Felix wasn't untrained. He was a crypto bro, a hustler, a man who lived and died by the spreadsheet. He was scanning the columns, his eyes darting back and forth. "What is this?" he muttered. These aren't accounts." I didn't answer. I just watched. He scrolled down. Faster now. The mouse wheel clicking frantically. "These are dates," he said, his voice rising in confusion. "And coordinates? GPS coordinates? Miriam, what is this?" He spun around in the chair, his face a mask of bewilderment. The arrogant menace was gone, replaced by the panic of a man who opens a treasure chest and finds only sand. I walked over to the window and looked out at the rain. It was falling harder now, drumming against the glass like 1,000 tiny fingers. "It is a ledger, Felix," I said calmly, without turning to look at him. "Just not the one you were hoping for." He stood up, knocking the chair backward. It hit the floor with a loud clatter. "Where is the money?" he demanded. His voice was raw. "Where are the Cayman accounts?" "I know they exist. Uncle Richard told me about them. He said he had a contingency fund." "He did?" I said, turning to face him. He had many contingency funds. Richard was a man who prepared for everything, even betrayal. I walked over to the bookshelf, the one where the real drive was hidden inside Great Expectations. I ran my finger along the spines of the books. You are looking at a record, Felix, I said. But it is not a record of assets. It is a record of liabilities. Specifically, moral liabilities. He looked at me as if I was speaking a foreign language. He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the roots. I don't have time for riddles, Miriam. I need the access codes. You don't understand, do you? I said softly. I picked up a small brass paperweight from the shelf. It was shaped like an owl. I weighed it in my hand. That drive you just opened? It contains the detailed logs of every fraudulent transaction Richard ever uncovered, but never reported. The leverage he kept on his enemies. The blackmail files. Felix stared at the laptop screen with horror. He realized what he was holding. He wasn't holding millions of dollars. He was holding a digital grenade. And do you know the best part? I continued, my voice hardening. When you decrypted that file, when you bypassed the security protocols, you triggered a silent alarm, not a burglar alarm, a data breach alarm. His face went white. What? The program embedded in that drive is designed to ping a remote server the moment it is accessed, I explained. It sends a notification, a digital fingerprint. It tells the server exactly where the file was opened and by whom. Felix looked at his laptop as if it were a venomous snake. He reached out to yank the drive from the port, but stopped, his hand hovering. Who gets the notification? He whispered. I smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. The people Richard was keeping tabs on, I lied. The people who really don't want those files to be seen. It was a bluff. A magnificent, bold bluff. The drive was actually just junk data, and the alarm was a simple script I wrote to lock the smart house down. But Felix didn't know that. He lived in a world of conspiracy and paranoia. He believed in shadow brokers and dark web hitmen. To him, this was a nightmare scenario that made perfect sense. He scrambled back from the desk, breathing hard. He looked around the room as if expecting assassins to burst through the windows. You set me up, he stammered. You crazy old witch. You set me up. I didn't set you up. Felix, I said. You broke into my house. You lied to my face. You cracked my safe. All I did was leave the cookie jar out. You were the one who put your hand in it. He paced the room frantically, his hands shaking violently now. I have to go, he said. I have to leave. Now. He grabbed his laptop, stuffing it into his bag along with the decoy drive. He didn't check the file again. He just wanted to run. He rushed toward the door, brushing past me. He didn't even look at me. He was in full flight mode. I let him go. I waited in the library, listening to his heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway. I heard him reach the front door. I heard the frantic jiggle of the handle, and then I heard the thud of his body hitting the wood as he realized it wouldn't open. I walked slowly out of the library and down the hall. Felix was wrestling with the front door. He was pulling and pushing, kicking at the base, but the heavy oak door was held fast by the electronic deadbolts. Open the door! He screamed at me without turning around. Open it! I can't, I said. The system is in lockdown. I told you, Felix. The alarm was triggered. The house seals itself automatically. It is a safety feature Richard installed to keep people out. Or in. He spun around, his eyes wild. He looked at the glass walls of the living room. He ran toward them, picking up a heavy stone sculpture from the side table. He was going to smash his way out. Don't! I shouted. He ignored me. He swung the sculpture with all his might against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Thud. The sculpture bounced off. The glass didn't even crack. Polycarbonate. I said, my voice echoing in the large room. Hurricane-proof, bullet-resistant. Richard was very thorough. Felix dropped the sculpture. It landed on the floor with a dull thud. He stood there panting, staring at his reflection in the unbreakable glass. He was trapped in a glass box with an old woman and a hard drive he thought was a death sentence. He turned to look at me, and in that moment, the fear in his eyes changed. It curdled. It hardened into something else, something ugly. "If I can't leave," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "then neither can you." He took a step toward me, then another. "Give me the real codes, Miriam," he snarled. "I know you have them. I know this was a trick. Give me the real money, and maybe I won't hurt you." I stood my ground. I didn't back away. I kept my hands visible. "There is no money, Felix," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It is gone. Donated." He didn't believe me. He lunged. He grabbed my arm. His fingers digging into my flesh through the silk blouse. He was strong, much stronger than he looked. He shook me. "Don't lie to me," he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. "I have people coming for me, Miriam. Bad people. If I don't pay them, they will kill me, and if I'm going to die, I'm taking you with me." I looked at him at the desperation etched into every line of his face. He was a drowning man trying to climb onto my shoulders to breathe. "Let go of me, Felix," I said quietly. He tightened his grip. "Where is it? Tell me." I looked past him toward the kitchen. I calculated the distance, 10 feet. I calculated the time. Seconds. I sighed, a long, weary sigh. "All right," I said. "All right, Felix, you win." He stopped shaking me. He blinked, surprised by my sudden surrender. "I will give you what you want," I said. "But it is not on a drive. It is in the vault. The real vault." His eyes lit up. "Greed. It is always the weakness." Where, he asked, breathless. "The wine cellar," I said. "Behind the vintage Bordeaux rack. There is a hidden wall safe. That is where the bearer bonds are." Bearer bonds. The magic words. Untraceable cash. "Show me," he commanded. He shoved me forward. "Move." I stumbled, but caught my balance. I began to walk toward the kitchen, toward the heavy door that led down to the cellar. I walked slowly, dragging my feet. Felix was right behind me, his breath hot on my neck. He thought he was leading me to his salvation. He didn't know I was leading him to the dark. The wine cellar was the only room in the house without windows. It was underground, soundproof, and it had a very heavy steel door that could only be opened from the outside if the electronic lock was engaged. I reached the cellar door. I opened it. A cool, damp draft drifted up, smelling of cork and dust. "After you," I said, stepping aside. He hesitated. He looked at the dark stairs, then at me. "You first," he sneered. "I am not stupid." I nodded. I stepped onto the first step. I began to descend into the darkness. Felix followed close behind. I counted the steps. 1, 2, 3. I needed him deep enough so he couldn't rush back up, but I needed to be close enough to the door to slam it. I reached the bottom landing. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall. "I can't find the switch," I said, my voice trembling. "It is so dark down here." "Use your phone," he snapped. I pulled out my phone. I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rows of dusty bottles. There, I pointed to the far corner. Behind the 1982 Petrus. Felix didn't wait. He shoved past me, rushing toward the expensive wine. He was focused entirely on the bottles, on the promise of hidden wealth. He was 10 feet away from me. 15. Now. I turned and bolted up the stairs. I moved faster than I had moved in 20 years. Adrenaline is a powerful drug. "Hey!" he shouted. I heard his footsteps scrambling behind me. He was fast. Younger. I reached the top. I grabbed the heavy steel handle of the door. I threw my weight against it, swinging it shut. Felix hit the door from the other side just as it slammed into the frame. Wham! The impact shuddered through my arm, but the latch clicked. I spun the manual lock. I slumped against the door, breathing hard. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. From the other side, I heard muffled screaming. I heard him pounding on the steel. "Miriam, open this door! Open it!" I slid down to the floor, sitting with my back against the cold metal. I closed my eyes. I had him contained. For now. But the storm was still raging outside, and I was alone in the house with a trapped animal in my basement and a digital alarm that, unlike my lie to Felix, was very real and had just alerted the local sheriff that the house was in distress. But the police were at least an hour away in this weather. And Felix was not the type to give up. I heard a sound from the basement. Not pounding, clinking, glass breaking, and then the smell. He wasn't just breaking bottles. He was breaking the neck of a bottle against the wall. He was making a weapon. Or... I sniffed the air again. Smoke. He wasn't making a weapon. He was lighting a fire. Smoke is a fast traveler. It does not need a passport or key. It simply finds the gaps. It curled out from beneath the heavy steel door of the wine cellar like a gray snake, slithering across the slate floor of my kitchen. It smelled of burning pine wood and the sugary, sickening scent of caramelized alcohol. "Felix, you idiot!" I shouted, slamming my hand against the metal door. "You are in a sealed room. You will asphyxiate yourself in 5 minutes." His voice came back muffled and ragged, punctuated by a wet cough. "Then open the door. Miriam, open it or I burn the whole place down." I found the crate of brandy. It burns real hot. I stared at the smoke. He was bluffing about burning the house down. The cellar was concrete and steel. But he wasn't bluffing about killing himself. The ventilation system would pull that smoke right up into the main HVAC unit and pump it into every room. But before that happened, the oxygen in that cellar would vanish. If he died down there, it wasn't self-defense. It was manslaughter. And I had spent my life upholding the law, not breaking it. I looked around the kitchen frantically. I needed a weapon. My eyes landed on the red cylinder mounted on the wall near the pantry. An industrial-grade fire extinguisher. Heavy, cold, pressurized. I grabbed it off the bracket. The weight of it was reassuring in my hands. I pulled the safety pin and let it clatter to the floor. "Stand back!" I yelled at the door. "I am opening it!" I didn't wait for an answer. I spun the manual lock and threw the lever. The door flew open as if it had been kicked from the inside. A billowing cloud of black smoke rolled out, blinding me for a second. I stepped back, raising the extinguisher, ready to spray him in the face if he lunged. Felix stumbled out of the darkness. He was bent double, coughing violently, his eyes streaming tears. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was clutching his chest, gasping for the clean air of the kitchen. His expensive sweater was singed at the hem, and his face was smeared with soot. He collapsed onto the kitchen island, wheezing. He looked pathetic. A boy playing with matches who had burned his fingers. I didn't lower the extinguisher. "Put it out," I commanded. He waved a hand dismissively, still coughing. It's just a crate. In the sink. I put it out before I came up. I kicked the cellar door shut and locked it again to keep the rest of the smoke contained. The kitchen was hazy now, the air acrid and stinging. I walked over to the sliding glass door and cracked it open. The storm roared outside, spitting rain into the room, but the fresh air was a relief. I turned back to Felix. He had recovered his breath. He wiped his face with his sleeve, smearing the soot into a gray bruise across his cheek. He looked at me, and then he looked at the heavy red tank in my hands. He didn't attack. The fight had gone out of him for a moment, replaced by a sullen, simmering rage. "You are crazy," he rasped. "You locked me in a dungeon. You broke into my house." I countered, my voice steady. "You threatened me. You tried to rob me." I walked around the island, keeping the granite slab between us. I set the extinguisher down on the counter but kept my hand on the nozzle. He laughed, a dry hacking sound. "Rob you? It's family money, Miriam. Uncle Richard made that money. It belongs to us, not to some dog shelter." He stood up, swaying slightly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gun. It was small, a compact pistol, probably bought off the same person who sold him the cracking tool. It looked shaky in his hand. I froze. A knife I can handle. A physical struggle I can manage with leverage and surprise, but a gun makes distance irrelevant. A gun ends the conversation. "Put it away, Felix," I said very quietly. "You don't want to use that." "Oh, I think I do," he said. His confidence was returning, fueled by the weapon. He leveled it at my chest. The barrel was dark and unblinking. "No more games, Miriam. No more sellers. No more fake drives. I want the real access codes. Now. Or I swear to God, I will put a bullet in you and tear this house apart brick by brick until I find them." I looked at him. I looked past the gun, past the soot, into his eyes. And I saw the truth. He wasn't going to shoot me. Not yet. He needed the codes too badly. Dead women don't type passwords. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders drop. I let the scared aunt mask fall away completely. I stood up to my full height. I looked at him not as a relative, but as a forensic accountant looking at a discrepancy in a ledger. "You are a fool, Felix," I said. My voice was no longer trembling. It was cold and hard as iron. He blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in my tone. "Shut up," he shouted. "No," I said. "You listen. You think you are the first desperate man to stand in my kitchen and threaten me? I spent 40 years tearing apart men like you. Men who think the world owes them a living. Men who gamble with money they don't have, and then blame everyone else when the bill comes due." I took a step toward him. He flinched, but he didn't fire. "You are not a criminal, Felix," I continued, my words cutting through the smoky air. "You are a tourist in a world you do not understand. You bought a gun you don't know how to use. You broke into a house you don't know how to navigate. And you are demanding money that doesn't exist." "I told you it exists!" he screamed. "Richard told me! Richard lied!" I shouted back, my voice cracking like a whip. Silence fell over the kitchen. The only sound was the rain hissing against the open door. Felix stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Richard lied." I said again, softer this time. "He didn't have a contingency fund, Felix. He was broke. When he died, he was leveraged to the hilt. The house is mortgaged. The cars were leased. The offshore accounts were empty shells used to move debt around so the investors wouldn't panic. I watched the realization seep into him. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible. He was rich. He was a showman," I said. "Just like you. He put on a good show." "But there is no money. There is no ghost ledger. The drive I gave you? The decoy? That was the only thing of value in this house because it contained the proof of his frauds. And you just uploaded it to the FBI. I lied again. It was a calculated risk. I needed to break his spirit. I needed him to believe that there was no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, only handcuffs." Felix lowered the gun slightly. His hand was shaking so bad I thought he might drop it. "The FBI?" he choked out. "When you plugged that drive in," I said, pressing the advantage. "I told you it triggered an alarm. I wasn't lying about that, but it wasn't a private security firm, Felix. It was a federal tripwire. They have been monitoring Richard's old networks for years, and you just lit up their map like a Christmas tree." He looked at the laptop sitting on the counter where he had left it. He looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at the window. "The police are coming," I said. "They are probably 10 minutes away." "Maybe less." Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic took hold of him. He wasn't thinking about the money anymore. He was thinking about prison. He was thinking about the loan sharks who would find him in a cell. He backed away from me. He looked wild, cornered. "You are lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I asked. "Do you hear that?" I tilted my head toward the window. There was nothing but the sound of the wind, but the power of suggestion is a mighty thing. "Sirens," I whispered. Felix strained to listen. He heard what he feared. He spun around and ran for the living room. He grabbed his bag. He grabbed the laptop. He left the gun on the counter. He didn't want to be caught with it. He ran for the front door. He yanked on the handle. "Locked! Open it!" he screamed at me from the hallway. "Let me out!" I walked slowly into the living room. I picked up the remote control for the smart home system from the coffee table. "I will let you out, Felix," I said, "but you won't get far. The bridge is likely washed out by now." "I don't care. Just open it." I pressed the button. The heavy bolts retracted with a loud thunk. Felix threw the door open. The storm rushed in, blowing rain into the hallway, soaking the expensive rugs. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were full of hate, but mostly they were full of fear. "This isn't over, Miriam," he spat. "It was over before you even parked the car," I said. He turned and ran out into the night, disappearing into the fog and the rain. I stood there for a moment, watching the darkness swallow him. I should have felt relieved. I should have locked the door and called 911. But I didn't. Because as I watched him run toward his car, I saw something else. A pair of headlights appeared at the bottom of the driveway. But they weren't blue and red police lights. They were yellow, and they belonged to a large black SUV that was blocking the exit. Felix skidded to a halt in the gravel. 2 men got out of the SUV. They were big men. They wore raincoats that looked like oil slicks. Felix backed away, his hands raised in surrender. The loan sharks. They hadn't waited for him to bring the money. They had tracked him here. And now they were looking past Felix. They were looking at the open door. They were looking at me. The rain acted like a curtain, blurring the details, but the intent was clear. The 2 men moved with a synchronized, predatory efficiency that Felix lacked. One grabbed Felix by the scruff of his neck, jerking him backward as he tried to scramble away. The other man, taller, broader, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, walked straight toward the open front door. Toward me. I didn't try to lock the door. There was no point. Glass walls. If they wanted in, they were getting in. A locked door would only irritate them. and irritated men are prone to mistakes. I needed them calm. I needed them confident. I stepped back, retreating into the foyer, allowing the space to open up. "Bring him inside," I said, my voice projecting over the sound of the storm. "I won't have the neighbors calling the police because of a brawl in my driveway." It was a bluff. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, but the mention of police made the tall man pause. He scanned the perimeter, checking for cameras, before signaling his partner. They dragged Felix into the hallway. My nephew was sobbing now, a high, thin sound that grated on my nerves. He was soaked, muddy, and broken. "Shut him up," the tall man said. His voice was gravel. The second man shoved Felix onto the hardwood floor. Felix curled into a ball, clutching his ribs. "Ms. Calloway," the tall man said. He didn't sound like a thug. He sounded like a businessman closing a difficult deal. He stepped into the light, dripping water onto my pristine floor. "My name is Mr. Vane. Your nephew owes my employers a significant sum. He told us the collateral was here." I looked at Felix, then back at Vane. I clasped my hands in front of me, assuming the posture I used during depositions. Non-threatening, but immovable. "He lied," I said simply. "Felix is a liar. It is his primary occupation." Vane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He said there is a drive, a ledger, worth $5 million. "There is no money," I repeated. "My husband died in debt. Felix is chasing ghosts." Vane sighed. He reached inside his raincoat. I tensed, expecting a gun, but he pulled out a collapsible baton. He flicked his wrist, and the steel extender snapped into place with a sharp clack. "I don't have time for the forensic accounting lecture, Miriam. May I call you Miriam? We are on a schedule. Give me the drive, or I break the boys' legs. One by one, then I start on yours." Felix shrieked. "Give it to them, Miriam! The drive on the counter! The decoy! Just give it to them!" Vane looked at the kitchen counter. He saw the silver USB drive Felix had abandoned next to the pistol. He also saw the pistol. He walked over, picked up the gun, checked the magazine, and pocketed it. Then he picked up the drive. "See?" Vane said, holding it up. "Cooperation. Was that so hard?" He pulled a tablet from his coat pocket and plugged the drive in. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face blank. This was the pivot point, the moment where the asset becomes a liability. "Don't," I said. "That drive is corrupted." "Quiet!" Vane snapped. He tapped the screen. I watched his face. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The screen of his tablet turned red. A loud, chirping alarm emitted from the device. Vane frowned. "What is this?" "I told Felix," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I told him it was a trap. He didn't believe me. He thought I was bluffing." Vane looked at the screen. "System lock. Geotag transmitted." He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. "What did you do?" "My husband was paranoid," I lied. Or rather, I told a version of the truth. "He rigged that drive. If anyone other than him tries to access the encryption without the biometric key, it doesn't just lock the data, it phones home." "Phones home to who?" Vane took a step toward me, raising the baton. "The FBI," I said. The room went deadly silent. Even Felix stopped crying. "You're lying," Vane snarled. "Am I?" I pointed to the wall-mounted smart home panel near the kitchen entrance. "Look at the status light." It was blinking red. "That's the silent alarm," I explained calmly. "It triggers automatically when a code red breach is detected on the network. That drive just injected a virus into your tablet, Mr. Vane. It's currently broadcasting your location, your device ID, and probably your face to the Cybercrimes Division in San Francisco. Vane smashed the tablet against the granite counter. Glass shattered. It's too late, I said. The handshake is complete. They are already dispatching local units. You have maybe 6 minutes. Vane's professional veneer cracked. He looked at his partner. Grab the bitch. We take her. She unlocks it, or we kill her in the car. The second man lunged for me. I didn't run. I couldn't outrun men half my age. But I didn't have to. I had home field advantage. I took one step back and slapped my hand against the large flat switch on the wall, the master control for the entertainment mode. But I had reconfigured it. Alexa! I shouted. Protocol 0! The house responded instantly. The warm, ambient lighting that bathed the living room vanished, plunging us into total darkness. A split second later, the emergency strobes installed in the ceiling, ostensibly for fire safety, but tweaked by me to maximum intensity, began to flash. Flash. Dark. Flash. Dark. It was a stroboscopic nightmare, disorienting and nauseating. At the same time, the Sonos sound system, hidden in the walls of every room, shrieked. It wasn't music. It was a high-frequency feedback loop I'd recorded from a malfunctioning server room fan, amplified to 100 decibels. Vane and his partner shouted, clutching their ears. The flashing light destroyed their depth perception. They stumbled. I knew the layout. I knew exactly where the kitchen island ended. I knew exactly where the step down to the sunken living room was. I moved. I crouched low, using the granite island as a shield, moving toward the library. Find her! Vane screamed over the screeching noise. A gunshot rang out. Vane firing blindly into the dark. The bullet shattered a pane of glass somewhere to my left. I reached the library door. I slipped inside and slammed the heavy oak door, locking it. The sound dampened instantly, though the strobes were still flickering under the doorframe. I grabbed the heavy chair from behind the desk and wedged it under the door handle. Then I went to the safe, the real safe, hidden behind the false panel in the wainscoting, not the decoy in the floor. I spun the dial. Click, click, click. I pulled out the real ghost ledger. It wasn't a hard drive. It was a small, leather-bound notebook. Old school. Unhackable. I could hear them outside. They were kicking the library door. The wood splintered. Open it! Vane roared. I moved to the window. The storm was raging, but through the rain I saw blue lights flashing at the bottom of the cliff road. I hadn't been lying to Felix in the kitchen. I hadn't been lying to Vane about the drive. I really had triggered the alarm. But not with a magic USB drive. When Felix had first arrived, when I made him tea, I had pressed the panic button under the lip of the counter. It was a silent summon. I had been stalling for time for 45 minutes. Crack! The library door gave way. Vane burst in, the baton raised, his face a mask of fury illuminated by the strobe lights from the hall. He saw me standing by the window. He saw the notebook in my hand. Give it to me, he breathed, stepping over the broken wood. You don't understand balance sheets, Mr. Vane, I said, holding the book over the bioethanol fireplace that was flickering in the wall. Don't! He lunged. I dropped the book. It fell into the flames. The pages, dry and brittle, caught instantly. Vane screamed and dove for the fire, reaching his hand into the flames to grab the burning book. Police! The voice came from the broken front door. It was amplified, authoritative. Drop the weapon. Police! Vane froze, his hand hovering over the fire. He looked at me. He looked at the police officers swarming into the hallway behind him, their tactical lights cutting through the strobe effect. He pulled his hand back. He dropped the baton. I watched the notebook curl into ash. "It's over," I said. Vane fell to his knees, hands on his head. I leaned against the cool glass of the window, my legs finally giving way to the trembling I had held back for an hour. I watched the ash float up the chimney. The assets were gone. The liabilities were arrested. The books were closed. The silence that follows a siren is heavy. It presses against the ears, louder than the noise that preceded it. My living room, usually a sanctuary of minimalist design and ocean views, looked like a crime scene, which, I suppose, it was. Mud tracked across the Persian rugs, broken glass from the tablet crunching under the boots of the officers. The smell of ozone, burnt paper, and fear. I sat on the edge of the ambulance bumper, a thermal blanket draped over my shoulders. I didn't need it. The adrenaline was keeping me plenty warm, but I accepted it. It played into the narrative. The poor widow. The victim. Paramedics checked my blood pressure. It was slightly elevated, but acceptable for a woman of my age who had just flashbanged a trio of criminals. "You're lucky, Miss Calloway," the paramedic said, packing away his kit. "Could have gone much worse." "I have a very robust security system," I replied softly. Across the gravel driveway, the drama was concluding. Vane and his silent partner were already in the back of a squad car, separated by steel mesh. They looked smaller now, stripped of their menace by handcuffs and the bright glare of police floodlights. Then they brought Felix out. He wasn't fighting. He was dragging his feet, his head hanging low. He looked like a child who had been sent home from camp in disgrace. When he saw me sitting by the ambulance, he stopped. The officer nudged him forward, but Felix planted his feet. "You burned it," he croaked. His voice was raw from the smoke in the cellar and the screaming. "You crazy old witch! You burned $5 million. Detective Miller, a weary-looking man who seemed to know the paperwork ahead of him was going to be endless, stepped between us. "Keep moving, son." "Wait," I said. I stood up, letting the thermal blanket slide down my arms. "Let him speak." Miller looked at me, then nodded to the officer to hold Felix there. I walked over to my nephew. I stopped 3 feet away, out of spitting range, just in case. "I didn't burn the money, Felix," I said calm, my voice carrying over the idling engines of the cruisers. "I burned a notebook." "It had the codes," he shouted, straining against the cuffs. "The offshore access. It was all in there." I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "Do you really think Richard kept $5 million sitting in a static account for 3 years? Richard couldn't let a dollar sit still for 5 minutes. Felix stared at me, confusion warring with his anger. "What?" "I'm a forensic accountant, Felix," I said. "Finding hidden assets is what I do. I found Richard's ghost ledger 3 days after the funeral. It wasn't hard to decrypt. He used his mistress's birthday as the password. Predictable to the end." "So you stole it!" Felix hissed. "You stole it for yourself." "I liquidated it," I corrected. "Yesterday morning. While you were likely renting that car and buying that gun, I was at the bank." I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only he and the detective could hear. "The notebook I burned? That was just a record of his transactions, evidence of his tax evasion and money laundering. I did him a final favor by getting rid of it. But the balance? The cash?" I paused, letting the suspense tighten around his throat. "I wired it to the Sunrise Sanctuary for Senior Dogs in Oregon. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. The transfer cleared this afternoon. It is irrevocable." Felix's face went slack. The fight drained out of him instantly, leaving only a hollow, horrifying realization. He hadn't just lost. He had been playing a game that was already over. You gave it to dogs? He whispered. Old dogs, I clarified. Dogs that people threw away because they were too slow, too gray, or too inconvenient. I thought it was poetic. Felix started to laugh. It was a high, hysterical sound that made the officers uncomfortable. The loan sharks, he giggled. Vane, his boss, they think I have the money. If I go to prison, if I don't pay them, then you have a problem, I said simply. But that is a liability on your balance sheet, Felix, not mine. I nodded to the officer. Take him away. Felix was still laughing as they shoved him into the back seat of the second cruiser. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of a man realizing the punchline was him. Detective Miller tipped his hat to me. We'll need a formal statement tomorrow, Miss Calloway. But for tonight, we've got men posted at the gate. You're safe. Thank you, Detective. The cars rolled out, a procession of red taillights disappearing into the fog. The silence returned, but this time, it was peaceful. I walked back into the house. The front door was broken, hanging off its hinges. The foyer was muddy. The library smelled of smoke. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. While the water boiled, I walked to the sliding glass wall and looked out at the ocean. The storm had broken. The clouds were parting, revealing a sliver of moon reflecting on the dark, churning water below. I thought about Richard. I thought about the years of lies, the hidden accounts, the arrogance. He thought he could outsmart everyone. He thought he could leave a legacy of greed. But legacies are tricky things. They require maintenance. They require an auditor. The kettle whistled. I poured the tea, Earl Grey, hot. I took a sip and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my banking app. Not the offshore one, just my personal checking account. I scrolled down to the pending transactions. There it was, a transfer of $5,000 to a contractor for door and security system repair. And below that, a notification from the Sunrise Sanctuary. A thank you note for the anonymous donation of $4.8 million. I smiled. Felix was right about one thing. Smoke is a fast traveler. It finds the gaps. But so does the truth, if you know where to look. I turned off the lights, leaving the house in darkness, save for the glow of the moon. I was tired. It takes a lot of energy to teach a lesson like that. But as I headed up the stairs to my bedroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. The ledger was balanced. The account was closed. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow I had a feeling there might be other ledgers out there. Other widows, other grandmothers, other people being bullied by men who thought the world owed them something. Maybe I wouldn't retire just yet.